Welcome back to Firmer Ground from SRM, where we explore trends and strategies impacting the current and future state of financial institutions in North America and across the globe. This is Neil Doherty, host of today's podcast and Managing Director of Global Marketing at SRM. Every episode features perspectives from the world of banking and financial services, including thought leaders here at SRM, executives at future-thinking financial institutions, and other experts from all corners of the industry. In this episode, I speak with Teresa Freeborn, former president and CEO of Connecta Federal Credit Union, the 35th largest credit union in the nation during her tenure. After stepping down from that role in late 2021, Teresa wrote and published her first book titled Suits and Skirts, Game On, The Battle for Corporate Power. Teresa keeps a busy schedule throughout the year, appearing across the country as a keynote speaker on the topic of gender equity and the need for empowered women leaders in businesses of all kinds. And she's a co-founder of clothing company Smash and Test, where she works in partnership with her daughter Ashley. Teresa most recently accepted a spot on SRM's International Advisory Board, and in this conversation, we touch on that topic and her influential perspectives on workplace diversity and inclusion. We hope you enjoyed this conversation with Teresa Freeborn. All right. Well, hi, everyone. Neil Doherty here, Managing Director of Global Marketing at SRM. And my guest today in the podcast studio is Teresa Freeborn. And Teresa is an executive, an author, a speaker, and a thought leader. And most of all, she's an advocate for women in the workplace. And she's penned a new book on the topic titled Suits and Skirts, Game On, The Battle for Corporate Power. So I'm delighted to have Teresa with us today on the SRM Firmer Ground podcast to discuss several topics, including, which I'm very happy about, Teresa's recent appointment to the SRM International Advisory Board, and how financial institutions can continue to challenge the status quo when it comes to gender equity and women leaders in the workplace. So welcome, Teresa. Thanks for joining us. And how are you doing today?
Oh, I'm doing very well. Thank you, Neil. It's so great to be with you today.
Awesome. Well, I couldn't be more excited. I know this conversation's been a bit of a long time coming, so I'm excited. And I thought it would be awesome for our listeners if you could just share a little bit about your background in financial services and how your journey to credit union leadership and a position in as a credit union executive kind of evolved over time. And if you just sort of give us that background, which I know is a big question, right? There's a lot to cover, but I'm sure you could share just a little bit about your journey there.
Oh, for sure. I guess it kind of all started in small town British Columbia, which is really where I'm from, born and raised in Canada. I'm now a dual citizen, so I've been in the US now for 23 years.
Awesome.
But, I didn't sort of set out to have a career in credit unions. I did not. I was coming out of high school and thought I'd take a bit of a break and think about what I wanted to do, school, work, and all of that. However, my mom kind of made the decision for me, and she got me a job at the local credit union because that's where she was doing her financial business. So
Okay.
I begrudgingly started on the following Monday right after graduation. And you know what? Turns out it was an amazing adventure. First of all, I always thought of myself doing noble work, and I thought, how cool is this? I'm pretty good with numbers. I love working with people. And man, I get to help them solve their financial problems. How cool is that? So noble work, there it was. I was feeling pretty good about that. So I
Very
spent
cool.
my career in several credit unions in Canada, and then had an opportunity to come stateside. I was speaking at a conference talking about a big program that I put in place in the BC credit union movement on cooperative advertising, sort of improving the image and awareness of credit unions. And so got to go speak around the world about it. A lot of cooperatives and credit unions were very interested in how you get a whole bunch of credit unions together to fund a multi-year, multi-million-dollar program to enhance the image and awareness of credit unions. So I kind of built my brand on that. And anyway, I got a job offer I couldn't refuse to come down and sit under the palm trees in Manhattan Beach, California. So any right-thinking Vancouver person would go yes, as soon as they got that job offer. So
A little bit of a different climate, I would imagine.
just a bit, yeah. Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, you mentioned that campaign, the industry campaign. I'd like to come back to that, but before we get into that, you did an awesome job of giving us the background, but also streamlining. And I know there's a lot that happens in anyone's professional career from point to point.
Mm-hmm.
And when I think about, the idea of someone who, started post-graduation and ends up in an executive role in the credit union space, there had to be some pretty big challenges that you faced along the way. And I'm curious, and I imagine, given your authorship, and we'll talk about the book and everything, a lot of those challenges probably became fuel for ultimately what you'd write about. And I was just wondering if you could, share a little bit about that and some of those kind of bigger challenges you faced along the way, and ultimately, how you overcame those.
Oh, great question. Because if I think back, there were all sorts of obstacles in the way of actually becoming a CEO of a large financial institution.
Hmm.
Again, I kind of went into it, eyes wide open for sure, not knowing anything about the industry and let alone ever increasing responsibilities, which I just always put my hand out for. I was just always interested in learning more, and ended up taking, by the way, my MBA when my kids were high school students. So we all got to study together on that dining room table. But so I did finish my education after all. But the struggle to get where I was, and at the time, I wasn't thinking of it as a struggle. I just thought this is the way life is supposed to be. It's supposed to be hard. I'm under no illusions here, right? So it was very easy for me to be stereotyped. I mean, as a woman, I came out of the marketing side of the house. So marketing and communications was my thing. And they certainly weren't making CEOs out of marketing people. Okay. So there was that. And then let alone I was a woman. So I never sort of was looked at as being one of those, top leaders one day. No one ever talked to me about that. No one ever sculpted me for that. It was just, I just kept putting my hand up and wanted to learn more and more and more. I also found it difficult, and I write about this in the book a bit, just the being taken seriously as a woman and a marketer, let alone that I'm blonde, that doesn't help. But it was just this whole can she really do the job? We don't really even think of her. She's not kind of top of mind. So
Hmm.
that was always a struggle throughout my many years of my career. And I have to say that it really did shape the content of the book because I finally figured it out. I finally figured out really what was in the way
Hmm.
of putting more women in leadership roles. So yes, all of that had some influence for sure.
But you shared an interesting insight there, which is
Mhm.
especially kind of where the typical CEO, COO, CFO comes from. And you mentioned the fact that your background was in marketing,
Mhm.
and I have to imagine that the percentages of folks that maybe that's changing, right? But what would you say the percentage of folks is that start in a marketing role and end up in a CEO role? I mean, it's got to be pretty low still, right?
Oh, yeah, it's single digit for sure. For sure
Yeah.
it is. Now, what's interesting is it continues to be a problem. A lot of this is sort of myth based as well. That if you were to close your eyes and think of if you were to think of a candidate for a marketing position, you still think woman. If you were to think of someone to head up HR, you still think woman. If you were to think of someone who would head up and be a CFO or a chief lending officer or, even a chief operating officer, you think male. So these are kind of those myths that I talk about in the book too.
Hmm.
It's not intentional. It's just how we view the world, and it's because of years and years and years of a very patriarchal society. I mean,
Hmm.
let's remember this. Neil, corporate America was built by men for men. It never envisioned women at the senior rank. So
Right.
we have a lot of work to do. And
Hmm.
there's it just shows you that kind of stereotypical positioning for women is really at issue still today, for
Yeah, and I
sure.
want to come. I want to come back to that, but before we do touch on a little bit more detail on that particular item, I just wanted to ask, maybe go back to you mentioned that you often just found ways to raise your hand through the early part of your career and through the whole arc of your career until you found yourself in the executive chair. But are there any particular choices that you think helped you? That you made or things that you raised your hand for that helped you improve your leadership skills that kind of gave you the base to stack some wins around the idea of you clearly knew what you were doing in your area of expertise, but becoming a leader takes a lot of different steps and a lot of different experiences. So I'm just curious if there are any kind of moments that stand out to you where you felt like you really took that sort of outside your comfort zone step and that ultimately helped you become a better leader.
Yeah, and this doesn't mean that I wasn't nervous about every time I put my hand up. Okay, so
Sure.
just so you know, scared to
Well, that's
death
just
all
it,
the
right?
time.
Outside your comfort zone, right? I mean, that's
Yeah,
that's part of
totally,
it.
totally. And it's typical of women in any setting, and men that are listening, I'm sure, can relate to this, and certainly the women can. First of all, let's just say this: the women, and me included, we had our bona fides in place, right? It's like, yes, we had the education. You said you wanted education, you got education. You wanted business expertise, man, we put in the years. So we have the chops. What we do as women, though, is we tend to just go through the world in a very different way. So things like promotional opportunities, we're not the first to put our hands up. This is probably what made me a bit of a standout. I was, and I don't know what led to that. I come from a family of all women. We have 4 girls in our family, didn't have any boys. There was no such thing as boy work, girl work. You know what I mean? We just did everything.
Right.
So I'm not so sure I was just bold because of that, and therefore I would put my hand up, knowing full well I had no idea of what I was doing. I mean, I remember the first conference I ever went to in America. Once I came to the country back in the year 2000, they sent me off to Washington, D.C. to lobby. Now, this is a Canadian girl who can't even vote, right? And I'm going to go and lobby and
Right.
speak to senators and congressional representatives.
Sure.
And what happens? Because I put my hand up, everyone else in the room, all of the constituents were all from the same constituent group. They just said, "Oh, give it to Teresa. She's a marketer. She'll sell it." So I became the spokesperson. Now I was sweating bullets. There's no question, but it's just about forcing yourself to. Once you get into it, it's okay. You know, you start to find your cadence, and it's fine. But women just don't tend to do that. So you've got to figure out a way to get more women in leadership. You better figure out a way to get more of them. Um, to be sort of tapped on the shoulder. Perhaps you take a different tact here. You don't wait for them to volunteer, but you say, you know, you've got the experience and the chops for this one. Why don't you take a look at this? Or we could sure use you at the table here. It's about how we bring women along. So, and again, I go into a lot of that in the book, but that's kind of what I think makes the difference, you know, because
Right.
women just, we have our own special, unique set of skills, which, by the way, are exactly the skills that corporations need today. And, you know, I always look at this and think, so instead of sort of asking the women to take on more of the men's special skills and attributes, how about we do the reverse and get the men to take on a little bit more of the women's, more of the female attributes of leadership? Because I think that balance is what we need, in the workplace today.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. So I want to segue to another question I just kind of had on my mind, and I'm sure there's some elements of this in the book as well. But do you feel that female leaders still face many of the same challenges that you did? Do you feel like there's been more meaningful change in recent years, whether it's in the credit union industry or professional space as a whole? I'm just curious kind of how you evaluate that and, what you've seen in terms of, potential change, whether it be incremental or sea change. I think there's probably a little bit of both, but curious to get your take on that.
You know, you've just hit the nut of this, okay? And that is that the majority of people out there, men and some women, actually believe that we don't have a problem anymore, that we have somehow solved this problem.
Mm.
But what I always bring everyone back to, and the reason why I wrote the book, is because if you just look at the numbers, let's just count the percentage of women in senior roles. I mean, it takes something just as simple as the Fortune 500. I read again today with the resignation of the CEO from Walgreens, that we're now down another woman in the Fortune 500. Do you know how many we have in there? We have 50 out of 500. It is 2023. In
Right.
1971, we had one. 50 years later, 52 years later, we have 50. It's pathetic. It's really a terrible,
Right.
shameful number. And if you want to talk about boards, it's the same thing. 25% of board positions are held by women. There's no need for that anymore. But the problem is that until you look at those numbers and see how woefully, inadequate they are, you don't get as mad and enervated as I do, right? So as soon as you start to accept that and embrace that, you then start to realize that, wow, what's in the way? Why is it 2023? And shouldn't we have 50-50 by now? I mean, it's
Right.
at the,
At
this
least,
is
right?
this is where I go to. So how I usually talk to my audiences in any speaking engagement is to, first of all, get them on the same wavelength as me. Are we all on the same page? Do you all understand that there still is a problem? Because if you don't, then you're not going to listen to the rest of the messaging.
Right.
So it's yes. Back to your question,
Yeah.
Neil, and that
The
is,
simple
so
answer
what?
is yes, right?
Yes, it's everything is in the way, whether it is just roadblocks that men have intentionally or unintentionally put in place, or whether it's just myths that are part of corporate culture. It is alive and well, all of it. And this is why you don't see that representation. When I see 50-50, that's when I can get off my soapbox here. I mean, I honestly believe that. But until
Mhm.
I do, there's a problem and everything is still in the way and nothing's changed. And it's been decades.
Well, and it sounds like, the crux of what you just shared is probably a pretty clear motivator for the reason that you took the time to concentrate on, writing and publishing this book, Suits and Skirts. But was there anything else that kind of motivated you? I guess my question a lot of times when I talk to someone who I know is like, did you always think you wanted to write a book, or was it more that you were compelled based on some of the experiences you had had? I'm just, I think that's an interesting question, because all of a sudden people find themselves as authors, and then maybe that continues and you kick out 6 7 more books, which I hope you do. That'd be awesome. Right. But then you may say to me, Neil, it was so difficult, I'm not trying that again. Or it could have been somewhere in the middle. Right. So I'm just curious,
Yeah.
when you think about your motivation, beyond obviously some of these clear discrepancies and the fact that between 1971 and 2023 we have not truly moved the needle the way that we should, what else motivated you to get into the authorship game here?
Well, I guess it's like anyone in corporate life right now. It's kind of a 24/7 kind of job, right? And
Hmm.
if you want to give anything to your industry, which I did, the industry gave me amazing opportunities, and I really did want to give back. So I also busied myself with a lot of industry involvement, sitting on boards for the industry, helping raise money for various causes. All of that stuff went on. So, which means your day was pretty full. And if you're a working woman, a mom, you don't have many minutes left in the day to think about book writing. Trust me, you just don't. But as soon as that came to a close, and it was a year after I orchestrated this big merger with Connective Federal Credit Union, putting two large credit unions together and creating a $7 billion institution. Um, it was like I exhaled and realized that, oh my God, I have something to say. So I started writing, and it was truly an 8 month process. Like that's not bad. I talked to so many people that say, oh my God, I'm still working on a book. It's been 6 years, and
Right.
I don't have that kind of time in my life. So I kind of just dove in, and I called it a brain dump first, because it was just I had
Sure.
to get something off my chest, and I really was mad as hell, and I wasn't going to take it anymore. I had a chance to think about where women are at. I got to reflect more than when you're in the moment and you're busy and you're working day to day, you're just not thinking about that, and not, it just was an opportunity to really stop and say, what can I do? And I honestly believe, Neil, that, it's any progress or change regarding gender parity and gender equity. It's a direct result of people demanding change. It's about the
Hmm.
activists and the advocates and the leaders and the innovators, and I really wanted to do my part. So it
Right.
was a bit of an activist part of me. Maybe, I was out of the 70s, so trust me, it was all still there. I burned my bra in the 70s for this cause, damn it. And look at how long it's been, decades and decades, and we're still not there. So yeah, I just realized it was a passion of
Sure.
mine to put it on paper. So maybe that's why it worked quickly and it went in the direction it did, because again, remember, I'm a marketer. So the first thing I thought of was, well, if you're going to write a book, who are you writing this to and how is it going to sell? There's no point doing something if it's not going to sell. So
Right.
I thought, there are no books directed at men. I've read them all. All the leadership books for women are all directed at women. Like, we
Right.
have something to do. And I'm saying, no, 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 wait a minute. So I kind of took it upon myself to say, if I wrote this for men, what would it look like? And
Right.
away I went. And maybe that's what helped fuel me. It was like a
Yeah.
completely refreshing kind of approach to it. So there you
Well,
go.
and that's a good segue into the question I had lined up next, which was, without obviously giving the whole book away, we want people to take the time to read it and do it contextually. I got the sense that this really was targeted towards men, and there were key takeaways. And so, I mean, could you share
Mm,
sort of in a nutshell what you're hoping that professional men who take the time to
mhm.
read this, to understand the narrative, what they should be taking away from it?
Yes. So let's start with my thesis. Basically, it's that men are holding women back. That's the reason why women aren't getting ahead. Okay. They are the gatekeepers, they are the bottlenecks, and they're the guardians. So it sounds pretty harsh. And it's meant to. It's meant to be bold, and not pulling any punches. And it's meant to be disruptive in terms of getting the attention of men to just listen up for a second here. Okay, can I review a few things with you?
Mm-hmm.
And so I kind of made sure I had a title that was a bit combative. It's not, I don't mean there's a war going on, but I do say it's a battle. It's a battle for corporate power. And so it was deliberate to do that. It was full of research. Neil, I went overboard on my research, not just pulling out every single piece of relevant information that I could and putting it as part of the book. And I got 12 pages of footnotes at the back. Every chapter has a summary of the research that was done. And I did that again because I knew men would probably look at me and say, Teresa, come on, this is your opinion and whatever. No, it's not actually. It's actually a culmination of amazing research that's been done year over year that exists
Mm-hmm.
today, and you're just not reading it. So it was all done sort of in design that way. But the battle that I speak of is just basically it is being waged in corporations throughout the world. On one side, you have the suits, of course, which are the men that hold the majority of the corporate power. And on the other side, you've got the skirts, the women who are seeking this level playing field for all the right reasons. They want an equal chance to move up the corporate ladder, to sit at the boardroom table. It all seems so fair when you think about it.
Mm-hmm.
But, we've spent decades fighting for that kind of equity, and it's just not happening. But really where I get men to very quickly in the book is that the evidence is pretty clear, guys. So companies with more women executives have increased earnings. More money earned corporately rationalizes more compensation, more bonuses, more career growth, not just for women, for men too, for everyone. So just remember this: more women at the top, less governance related controversy, better corporate culture. I mean, I could go on and on. The evidence is so clear. So I thought, okay, start with making sure that everyone understood this is why we need to make some change. And if you're all with me, because it's for the success of your business, for goodness sake.
Right.
Now let's talk about how we're going to go about doing that. So we won't get into that today, Neil, because that's a whole other podcast, I'm sure. But there are so many things that men could do today to actually right this thing, to make significant change here. But it's
Mm-hmm.
about having the right attitude and having it top of mind.
Okay, that sounds good. And we're going to obviously point folks to where they can get the book so that they can
Yeah.
completely dive into some of those key points, those key takeaways, those principles that I know you've built into this. And kudos to you, obviously, for doing the research and making the data, kind of match the thesis, which is awesome. And I know I've had a chance to just kind of skim through it a little bit. I'm looking forward to reading it fully myself so that I can have some key takeaways from it as well. But I mean, when you think about going through the process of research, you author a
Mhm.
book, you get feedback from folks. I know you appear at a lot of different conferences. You talk to people who have read the book or people who are about to read the book. There's all these kind of new experiences that are happening. Anything that you've learned in the last couple of years through this process that says, kind of helps you think like, man, I could have even done this, or that in my leadership role at the credit union, right? And you just said it, like you engineered a huge merger, right? And I know that was something you probably needed a year off from after the fact anyway, right? Just to catch your breath. But I always wonder, like through this experience, is there anything that you almost say to yourself, like, gosh, like I wish I would have done X or Y maybe a little bit differently even when I had the chance. And maybe and it could be just being even more bold, right? But I'm curious
Yeah.
what that looks like.
I, I think you're on the right track there, because I would say that the things that come to my mind are, I wished I'd sort of seen this inequity in its full force, but actually done a lot more earlier. So done more sooner. And I didn't. And I can think about the reasons why, let alone all of the roadblocks that were in place. And I realized that I probably couldn't move faster. But I think I could have done something sooner. Sooner meaning I could have reached out and probably taken on more significant roles, and I didn't. Again, it was just thinking, well, they're not going to hire me for that. I don't have all the chops. I don't have all the credentials, so that's not going to work. But I guess the other piece of it is the sense of urgency. I wish I'd made it more urgent in my life to be this advocate of women and really push this forward. I think
Mhm.
I could have made a difference earlier. I really could.
Well, I think that's good advice for anybody, right? Yeah, in terms of
Mhm.
like, not kind of pushing something off that you feel like could make an impact in your
Yeah.
organization? Again, whether that's cultural, whether it's process oriented, whether it's something that helps, the a member's experience, all the things that we all think about, like, oh, it would be great if, right?
Mm.
Finding ways to come through on that, right? And some of that is, the organization that you work in enabling that, right? And thinking about programs that are there, but
Yes.
also it's about, having the determination to stick with something, right? And I think that, people will gain some of that from the book as well. And certainly, I asked that question because I just think it's kind of, it must have been an interesting process for you to,
Hmm.
leave the credit union world, right? After
Hmm.
having led it, having, merged credit unions together, and then saying to yourself, now I'm going to be an author, right? But I've never done this before. And then I went through this whole, metamorphosis, if you will, and I have these new experiences. So I just felt like that was a question that I needed to ask, and appreciate you thinking about that a
Yeah,
little bit.
you make me think too that the one thing that's been a bigger, aha to me is having these conversations about this subject, that a lot of young women, they still see these inequities today in corporate America. Credit unions, I mean, we all talk about our credit union industry being very different. It's not, it's the same. And women will talk about it. And it's like, if I couldn't give them a voice earlier like this, isn't that a wonderful thing? And that's what they tell
Hmm.
me, that thank you for giving me a voice. I didn't have one. I didn't have a script. I didn't know what to say when I see these things. And now I do. So, there's a little uh, unexpected gift, I think. So I'm kind
Hmm.
of happy about that. Yeah.
Well, I guess let me ask you a question, and maybe this is slightly adjacent to what we've been talking about. But do you feel
Mhm.
like some of the larger credit union associations, excuse me, are doing the right work and being advocates for more opportunities for women? I know that the Global Women's Leadership Network is something that
Mhm.
we are connected with, but I'm curious, do you feel like those larger bodies have done enough to serve the credit union industry specifically, and women leaders in that space?
Oh, I think it's getting much better, but I think because, of course, the credit union industry was run by men as well, started by men
Hmm.
and run by men for years and years and years. So again, they didn't see the urgency. I think it's better, and I think we are looking at it. I know that I sat on the CUNA board, and I knew that we had a lot of discussion on this, and tried to come up with the programs that would help credit unions move forward with DEI programs. And I know I was one of the inaugural members of Global Women's Leadership Network 15 years ago, where we sat in it was a lobby bar at the Marquee in Washington, D.C. with
Yeah.
Brian Branch and Diana Dykstra and Sue Mitchell and Patsy Van Arkirk. We said, Brian, we've got to do something here. And he responded, and we formed it. So but again, it's the pace of change here that is so slow. 15 years ago, and we're still talking about, getting groups together to make a change here. Why don't we just make the change? And here are the steps to do it. So,
Mhm.
yeah, it's
Well,
interesting.
and let me ask you this, you quoted a pretty interesting stat about the Fortune 500 and
Yeah.
the CEO headcount. But in your research, are there any industries that you feel that actually have kind of made, more significant change in the way that they empower women in the workplace, compared to some others? Are there any, I'm just, and again, this is just more of a curiosity because I haven't done the research. I don't know.
Yeah.
But are there any that stand out to you, at least in terms of like making more progress and setting the path for, a better end game on that?
There are so few examples. They do exist, just like anything, right? You're always going to find those outliers. And there
Sure.
are a couple of credit unions that I have come across that I think are doing amazing work there. And they really do keep this whole subject top of mind, make sure that they are and working very hard on creating that gender equity and that diversity that they need at both board table and leadership.
Hmm.
But I think that the best example, and this is something that I think credit unions really need to think about, and other banking entities, and it doesn't matter what business really in corporate America, but these women, if they're not given that shot at those senior positions, they will leave. They will go and form their own businesses, and in some cases become your competitor. So I actually think that if the corporation's not willing to change, and remember, think of the demographics, they're still by and large mostly run by men. So we've got some quick change to make here. We have to hang on to this talent that's there. or people will go off and do their own and run their own businesses. I know you and I talked about it, but I know I run a small business with my daughter,
Hmm.
and it's women owned and women run. So women are calling the shots on this, and we're doing pretty good. Like
Yeah, that's
it's,
great.
these exist, and I've listened to so many women in the small business realm that have just said, "Nah, I was fed up. I just couldn't get there. I couldn't get it. I couldn't make the progress I wanted to make in my career. So I'm going to do it myself." And they're doing very well. So
Mhm.
maybe that's what's going to happen. But
Well, that's
you know,
and there's some irony there too because I don't know if you listened to one of the earlier podcasts I had done. I talked to Rodney Hood, who was obviously
mhm,
the former NCUA chairman and
yep,
just an advocate for many causes throughout the country and along with the credit union movement. And we talked a little bit about one of the challenges moving forward for the credit union industry being a kind of a war for talent, if you will, right? Because
yeah,
it's real everywhere now, right? We know
mhm,
that there's a dearth of kind of the right people with the right education and the right mentorship being there when the organizations need them, right? So it sort of concerns me when I think about what you're saying and how there's this other reality and they're not matching up, right? Like, so
mhm,
it seems to be that there's a big opportunity there to make those two things meet so that both parties evolve, and that doesn't have to be one of the bigger concerns for the future of credit unions. If they can find ways to be more creative, be more inclusive, and
yep.
just kind of look for those opportunities. So I don't know what your take on that is, but again, I just wanted to mention the fact that obviously the war for talent is real when it comes to the credit union industry as it is for other industries.
It absolutely is. And I support Rodney's remarks in that regard for sure. And I think the best stat I can give you of this kind of change and what's going to happen, if you think of women, they've got the education. By the way, they're coming out of schools, every faculty in graduate work, postgraduate work, every faculty more women than men today. There's no
Hmm.
question. That's hands down what you're going to see out there. But they are forming their own businesses. And I pulled out a stat, which I thought was so remarkable to me. But in 2018, there was something like 26% of all small businesses were formed by women.
Hmm.
In 2022, it was up to 57%. Like, I mean, that's what's happening. Women are saying, no, it's too slow. I'm not getting what I want. It's inequitable, and I'm going to go do my own thing. Thank you. And these are bright, capable women that
Sure.
corporations could stand to keep in their ranks in every faculty and every kind of business. I don't care whether it's the medical, education, music, for God's sake. It could be anything, finance, yes, every kind of corporation, the car business. I mean, it's time.
Hmm.
Consumers demand the equity at your board table. Consumers demand the equity in your leadership team. And one of the easy things I always tell all of my credit union folks that I talk to or banking folks that I talk to is that, when you're dealing with your vendors out there and you're talking to your business partners that want to do business with you, why don't you just ask them? Why don't you ask them? So, what's your makeup? Tell me about your C suite. Do you have equal representation there? How diverse is your C suite? Tell me about your board. It doesn't mean you're not going to make your decision. Yes, you will make a decision and you won't just base it on gender equity, of course, but it's going to make them think about it. And so when those salespeople go back to their senior people and they say, hey, there's a lot of question about this. Are we working on that? You start to
Right.
change the world. It's one little step at a time, but these are the things you have to constantly keep top of mind.
Hmm. Yeah, and it's something that I know as a company, we're thinking about right now and looking at ways to advance that. And I guess that's probably a good segue because I wanted to just talk for a few minutes, if we could, about this new board role that you're taking on at SRM, which we're obviously
Yes.
very, very excited to have you join.
Mhm.
And just wanted to know, kind of, if you could share a little bit about how you got connected with the team at SRM and how that came about.
Well, first of all, the team at SRM are they're kind of omnipresent, right? They're everywhere I go.
They are.
So,
Yes,
I
they've
I
got North
met
America covered, that's for sure.
I met Jason Berman years ago and Ben Merva and Brad Downs. These people have been everywhere. Now Mark Seabright's involved, and these are all people I very much respect. And the good news is when I was asked to be part of this group, which by the way I was just very excited to have the opportunity to do this. Um, I was, of course, checking out the system out there and asking about, SRM. Well, here's the good news. SRM is kind of well known now. I mean, there is such an awareness of SRM in the industry, which is fantastic. Um, there's only one reason for that, though, because they do good work. You
Hmm.
know, everyone that I talk to say, "Oh my God, what would we do without an SRM?" Because they can give us that objectivity, and we don't have the resources to do that kind of analysis on. We want to change a vendor, we want to change a solution.
Hmm.
We don't have the expertise internally. We can't do that, but we want a good price and we want good work, and that's what they get when they go to SRM. So it's kind of been interesting for me because people have congratulated me on my appointment, and then just say, "Oh, great firm." And so it was very validating for me. So just so you know, I love the
Well,
guys
me
anyway.
too.
I've known them for years, but I am feeling very validated that I made the right
Yeah.
choice.
No, and
Mhm.
we appreciate that, and I think as you probably know, we're a company that's very connected to our core values, the things that got us off the ground, the things that allowed us to connect with our clients, and the fact that we do really put a lot of value in that kind of synergy that we have with the client, with the vendors, with all the folks that we work with in the process to be able to bring value and trust. And, again, part of that, we're trying to grow and become more aware of our opportunities, our, where we can do better. And I think the International Advisory Board is a great example of that. So I'm just
Mhm.
curious, when you think about that appointment and you joining the fray here, what are you most looking forward to as a member of that group?
Well, it'll give me a great opportunity to deepen some of the relationships I have with the management team, which I'm really looking forward to. But I love the idea of the new relationships with the fellow board advisory members, and the fact that they're from all over the world and
Hmm.
different industries. And it's just going to kind of, again, another growth experience for Teresa. So I'm excited about that. And, you know, I'm I guess as I look forward to, I think my next first meeting will be in December.
That's
So
right.
I just hope that everything that I'm thinking about is going to come true, because I think it will. I'm very excited about it. It's a very great opportunity. I met the chairman the other day on the phone, which was fantastic. Stan and I had a nice chat,
Hmm.
and I already want to pick his brain about 20 things. So there you go.
Sure.
That's how it starts, right? So it's good.
Yeah.
It's really positive.
Well,
Mhm.
and I think some of the the concepts and principles that you bring forth in the book, that you can share that with this group, and I think there'll be a really important influence across the board. In addition to what you mentioned, which is that our international advisory board for our listeners is really comprised of fintech, financial services, consulting, customer experience leaders from throughout the world, not just here in North America, as we seek to become a more global company. And I think that a lot of the perspectives and the insights that you bring, and the fact that you've been an author, and those other folks on the board that have also written and published books, like Stephen Van Bellingham, who's based out of Belgium, and also a really innovative thinker, that there's going to be a lot of great mind share there. And ultimately, I'm excited because it helps us mold ourselves into a better company with all those perspectives, those inputs, those actions that can come from those meetings and those sessions. So we're obviously over the moon to have you aboard, Teresa, and thank you
Mhm.
again for agreeing to do that, because I think you bring some really critical perspectives to the diversity of our board and our company as a whole. So it's an exciting time here at SRM. We've covered a lot of topics today. And I know some of them you could talk for hours on. So I appreciate the fact that we're able to kind of keep it concise for the sake of the listeners today. But I just wanted to kind of cap this off by asking, you think about the previous experiences in the credit union space. You've learned a lot over the last few years as a researcher, as an author, as a speaker, as an advocate. What words of advice would you give to a CXO in today's credit union, the banking climate that we have, male or female, that you think would, that just should resonate in today's environment?
I would probably I'd probably go back to when I first designed a chief experience officer's job description back at Exceed,
Hmm.
maybe almost 10 years ago. Overall, it was to be the person that was leading the design of uh, customer obsessed business strategies. Okay, like it had to be based on the customer. So I don't think anything's changed. I think the one thing that I would add is that, and so when I say that, by the way, what I'm talking about is people, these folks that sit in those chief experience officer positions, they have to have the best communication and interpersonal skills, right? They have to
Mhm.
be the best at building strong relationships, but they also have to understand the customer needs and motivations, and really understanding the journey that customers go through to get access to your products and services. So all of that's super important, but I think every day you get to be a little smarter. You know what I mean? So, as a chief experience officer, I would say the world moves at such a fast pace. Sadly, the only thing that's not moving fast is the gender equity piece, but but the rest of the world is moving super fast. And every day it changes, right? Every day
Right.
that you think, like a week ago, you thought you had an answer to something, but then you just learned something yesterday. Oh my goodness, guess what? You're gonna revise and change, but that's okay to do that. So, I think just keep the focus on the customer. At the end of the day, that's the key.
Sure. No, that makes sense. That makes sense. Well, uh, and I think as more people hear your perspectives, so people get more exposure to the book, there might be some things that they can weave in as well on kind of an everyday scenario. So I can't thank you enough for joining me on this podcast today, sharing your experiences, your perspectives. Again, I know we could probably talk for hours in terms of some of the backstories and the work you've done, but I think overall, our listeners would be able to take away some good food for thought across the board here, ideas we can all kind of do better to promote equity, diversity in the workplace. And of course, your new book is available now, and the listeners can get a copy via teresafreeborn.com. That's TeresaFreeborn.com. I think I spelled that right, Teresa. Did I get that?
Yes, you did. Or
Um,
just go to Amazon. You're going to
that's
find
right.
it there.
You can
Here we
search
go. Nice
Teresa's
and
name
easy.
on Amazon, and you can view the summary. You can add the book to your cart very easily,
You bet.
and you can get access again to Suits and Skirts, which I know that the entire team at SRM is going to be probably reading up on as we embark on having Teresa as part of our international advisory board, which is exciting. So I hope we get a chance to talk again soon. I mean, I know we'll see each other in December for the meeting, but I hope we get to do another podcast. Maybe there's a topic that comes out of some new experiences. And will we be seeing another book anytime soon?
Well, I've been thinking about it, but haven't put pen to paper yet. But there's all sorts of things I can get mad as hell about. You know what I mean? And I think that you
This
need
yeah.
emotion is what moves mountains. If you get frustrated enough and get sort of something like a burr under your saddle here, you're gonna do something about it. So yes, there are other things I'd love to talk about for sure.
All right. Well, we will remain in suspense until we hear
Yeah.
more. But thank
Okay.
you again. I really appreciate you being on the podcast today.
Thank you, Neil. It's been my pleasure.
All right. Excellent. And thanks everybody for listening, and we'll talk to you again soon. Thanks for listening to Firmer Ground from SRM. Please stay tuned for our upcoming podcasts. Until then, you can visit us at srmcorp.com or on LinkedIn and Twitter.